Imagine for a moment that the flat Earth theorists were right. Picture our planet not as a spinning sphere hurtling through space, but as a massive flat disk with the Arctic at its center and Antarctica forming an ice wall around the edges. Sounds impossible, right? Well, here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. If Earth were actually flat, you wouldn't be here to debate it. In fact, human life, or any life at all, would be completely impossible on a flat planet. The physics alone would create such catastrophic conditions that our world would either tear itself apart within hours or become a frozen, airless wasteland floating helplessly through space. But here's what kept me up for nights researching this. Even if we could somehow magically make a flat Earth stable and habitable, the world we'd live in would be so bizarre, so alien, that it would make science fiction look tame. Gravity would work backwards. The sun would behave like a cosmic spotlight, and the weather would be so extreme that the North Pole would be a tropical paradise, while the edges of the world would be colder than Mars. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why our round Earth isn't just scientifically correct. It's the only reason we exist at all. Let's start with the most fundamental problem: gravity. On our spherical Earth, gravity pulls everything toward the planet's center, which is why down always feels the same no matter where you are. But on a flat Earth, the gravitational physics would create a nightmare scenario that would make life impossible. On a flat disc-shaped planet, gravity wouldn't point straight down everywhere. Instead, gravitational force would pull toward the center of mass of the disk, which would be somewhere in the Arctic region if we're following flat Earth models. This means that as you travel away from the center toward the edges of the world, gravity would increasingly pull at an angle. In flat Earth terms, if you lived in what we call Australia, gravity wouldn't pull you down toward the ground. Instead, it would pull you diagonally toward the North Pole at roughly a 45-degree angle. Walking would become nearly impossible because you'd constantly feel like you're on a steep slope pulling you northward. Buildings couldn't stand upright. They'd need to be constructed at extreme angles to compensate for the diagonal gravitational pull. But it gets worse. Water wouldn't flow normally either. All of Earth's oceans would flow toward the center of the disk, creating a massive mountain of water in the Arctic while leaving the edges of the world completely dry. The gravitational gradient would be so extreme that atmospheric pressure would vary wildly across the planet. People living near the edges would experience lower atmospheric pressure, making breathing difficult, while those near the center would be crushed by abnormally dense air. The most catastrophic problem is structural integrity. A flat Earth with Earth's current mass would be gravitationally unstable. The disk would either collapse into a sphere under its own gravity, which is exactly why planets are round in the first place, or it would tear itself apart as different regions experience vastly different gravitational stresses. Flat Earth models typically describe the sun as a small, local object circling above the disk like a spotlight. But the physics of this arrangement would create conditions so extreme, they'd instantly sterilize the planet. For the sun to appear the same size from all locations on a flat Earth, it would need to be approximately 3,000 miles above the surface and about 32 miles in diameter. But here's the problem. An object that small and that close couldn't possibly generate the energy output our sun produces. Nuclear fusion requires enormous mass and pressure, conditions that can only exist in objects much larger than 32 miles across. If we somehow had a miniature sun of this size, it would either burn out within days or be so incredibly dense that it would be a neutron star. An object so gravitationally powerful, it would tear apart everything on Earth's surface. There's literally no middle ground in physics that would allow a 32-mile-wide sun to provide stable energy for billions of years. The spotlight effect would create temperature variations so extreme they'd make Earth uninhabitable. The area directly under the sun would experience temperatures hot enough to melt metal, while regions just a few hundred miles away would be frozen solid. There would be no temperate zones, no gradual climate changes. just scorching heat directly under the solar spotlight and deadly cold everywhere else. Day and night cycles would be completely different from what we experience. Instead of the gradual sunrise and sunset we know, the sun would appear to move in a circle overhead, growing brighter as it approaches and dimmer as it moves away. This would create bizarre lighting conditions where shadows would constantly change direction and length throughout the day. The seasonal changes flat Earth models attempt to explain would be even more problematic. For the sun to create seasons, it would need to spiral in larger and smaller circles. But this would create temperature and daylight variations so extreme that most of the planet would be uninhabitable for large portions of the year. On a spherical Earth, our atmosphere is held in place by gravity, pulling equally toward the planet's center. But on a flat Earth, atmospheric dynamics would create conditions that would make breathing impossible across most of the planet. With gravity pulling at angles rather than straight down, atmospheric pressure wouldn't distribute evenly. The center of the flat Earth would accumulate so much dense atmosphere that the pressure would be crushing, potentially 10 or 20 times normal atmospheric pressure. Meanwhile, the edges would have such thin atmosphere that they'd be like mountaintops at extreme altitude. Air circulation would be completely chaotic. Instead of the predictable wind patterns we know, air would constantly flow from the edges toward the center, creating permanent hurricane-force winds across most of the planet. Weather systems couldn't form normally because the atmospheric pressure differentials would be so extreme that they'd overwhelm any other weather-creating mechanisms. The concept of breathable air would become location-dependent in ways that would make human civilization impossible. People in the center regions would need pressure suits to survive the crushing atmosphere, while those near the edges would need oxygen tanks due to the thin air. There would be no normal atmospheric zone suitable for human life. Temperature regulation through the atmosphere would be impossible. Our spherical Earth's atmosphere circulates heat from the equator to the poles, creating relatively stable global temperatures. On a flat Earth, heat distribution would be so inefficient that the temperature gradients would create permanent storm systems of unprecedented violence. Earth's water cycle depends entirely on our planet being a sphere. On a flat Earth, the hydrological cycle would break down completely, creating conditions that would eliminate all surface water within decades. All of Earth's water would flow toward the center of the disk due to the gravitational effects we discussed. This would create a massive freshwater sea in the Arctic region, while leaving the rest of the world as a desert. The ice wall that flat Earth models describe around the edges would be impossible to maintain because there would be no water reaching those regions. Ocean currents, which regulate global climate on our spherical Earth, couldn't exist on a flat planet. The water flowing toward the center would create a single massive whirlpool-like circulation pattern. This would eliminate the Gulf Stream, the Pacific currents, and all other oceanic systems that currently regulate global temperatures. Precipitation patterns would be completely disrupted. Water evaporated from the Central Sea would fall as rain primarily in nearby regions, creating a localized water cycle that would leave vast areas of the planet permanently dry. The edges of the flat Earth would become uninhabitable deserts with no possibility of rainfall. Tidal forces would be impossible to explain in flat Earth models. Our current tides are caused by the Moon's gravitational pull on Earth's spherical oceans. On a flat Earth, tidal mechanics would either not exist at all or would create bizarre water movements that would make coastal living impossible. The most devastating effect would be on global ice dynamics. Earth's ice caps currently reflect solar radiation and help regulate global temperature. On a flat Earth, ice would only form in the peripheral regions where temperatures would be permanently below freezing, creating a feedback loop that would gradually freeze the entire planet. If we could somehow suspend the laws of physics and create a stable flat Earth, the evolutionary and biological implications would be staggering. Life as we know it could never have evolved under these conditions. Plant life would be impossible across most of the planet due to the extreme temperature and atmospheric pressure variations. only a narrow band around the center of the disk might have conditions suitable for vegetation. But even this zone would experience such dramatic day-night temperature swings that complex plant ecosystems couldn't develop. Animal migration patterns would be completely different. Instead of seasonal migrations following temperature bands or food sources, animals would be forced to migrate along pressure and temperature gradients that run from the center to the edges of the world. This would create permanent migration corridors with no seasonal variation. Human civilization would be confined to a small habitable zone around the center of the flat Earth. The vast majority of the planet's surface would be uninhabitable due to atmospheric, gravitational, or temperature extremes. Population density would be so concentrated that resource competition would make complex societies impossible to maintain. Agriculture would face challenges that would prevent the development of civilization as we know it. The extreme weather variations, unpredictable atmospheric pressure, and lack of stable water sources would make crop cultivation nearly impossible. Food production would be limited to small areas with marginal conditions. The development of technology would be severely hampered by the resource limitations and population constraints. Mining operations would be impossible in the peripheral regions due to atmospheric conditions, limiting access to metals and other materials necessary for technological advancement. One of the most obvious problems with flat Earth theory is navigation. Our current navigation systems, from ancient celestial navigation to modern GPS, all depend on Earth being spherical. On a flat Earth, navigation would work completely differently and would reveal the planet's true shape immediately. Celestial navigation would be impossible to reconcile with flat Earth models. The way stars appear to move across the sky, the behavior of constellations at different latitudes, and the position of celestial objects all provide clear evidence of Earth's spherical shape. On a flat Earth, star maps would need to be completely different, and many navigational phenomena we observe would be impossible to explain. The concept of time zones wouldn't make sense on a flat Earth with a local sun. If the sun were circling overhead like a spotlight, everyone on the planet would see it at the same time, just at different distances. The gradual progression of sunrise and sunset across the globe that creates our time zones could only occur on a spherical planet. Compass navigation would be chaotic because magnetic fields around a flat disk would behave completely differently than they do on our spherical planet. The magnetic North Pole couldn't exist in the same way, and compass readings would be unreliable across most of the planet's surface. GPS systems would be impossible to implement because satellite positioning relies on the geometry of a spherical Earth. The mathematical calculations that allow GPS to work are based on Earth's curved surface, and these calculations would be meaningless on a flat planet. If Earth were flat, the entire concept of satellites and space exploration would need to be completely reimagined. Every aspect of our space program depends on the physics of a spherical, rotating planet. Orbital mechanics, the science that allows us to launch satellites and spacecraft, is based entirely on objects orbiting around a spherical mass. On a flat Earth, there would be no stable orbits. Any object launched into space would either crash back to the surface or fly away into space. There's no physical mechanism that would allow satellites to circle above a flat disk. The International Space Station, which can be seen with the naked eye from Earth's surface, would be impossible to maintain above a flat Earth. Its orbital path, which takes it around our spherical planet every 90 minutes, couldn't exist above a flat disk. The ISS would need to be held up by some form of propulsion system, which would make it prohibitively expensive and technically impossible with current technology. Communication satellites that provide global internet, television, and phone services work because they're positioned in geostationary orbit above a rotating spherical Earth. On a flat Earth, global communication coverage would require a completely different approach, likely involving ground-based systems that would be far less efficient. Weather satellites that provide meteorological data depend on viewing Earth's curved surface from space. The weather patterns they observe, including the rotation of hurricane systems and the movement of weather fronts, all confirm Earth's spherical nature and rotation. These patterns would be impossible to observe from above a flat disk.